door.
Uh-huh. All right. Hold on.
Oh, 5. It's a little bit dark still.
Do you hear anything from Brian? Okay.
Thank you. Thinking. Yes.
Okay. Let's go ahead and start then. I'm going to call this Planning Commission meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. on October 20th. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearing examiner, or a court. Could our clerk please call roll?
Tel Jensen,
I'm here.
Brian Matson, Sharon Watt,
Present.
Bo?
Is he coming?
Yeah, Brian Matson's here.
Brian is
But
here.
Shauna Gawthorne,
Here.
Karen Shuddock,
Unfortunately, Karen has moved out of town, so she sent us a resignation letter last week. So, musical chairs 2.0.
are we having a wake after that?
Brian Matson, are you here?
Present.
All right. I don't see anybody join the meeting. This would be time for public comment. If we see anybody walk in, I'll probably open that up again. So, next up is approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
I second that.
Fantastic. Anybody opposed to approving the agenda as written? Motion carries. Fantastic. What do we have up next? We have consent items and the approval of our last minutes from July,
June.
June.
I remember it like it was yesterday.
Was it? It was July. Okay. Okay. All right. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from our July 21st?
We approve the minutes from July.
I second that.
Okay. Any discussion about the minutes? No? All right. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes as written? All right. Motion carries. Nicely done. Next up is a discussion workshop on a pilot program for the climate resilience element in our comprehensive plan. Item 22-0080. So we got a supporting packet.
Could you go to the PowerPoint? There you go, the second PowerPoint.
This one?
No, the other one. There we go.
Good to see.
So before I get started on this, I did want to point out that we have a new permit technician on board, and so in addition to our clerk, Amanda Hogan, we have Alyssa Brentano, who is new to the city, and we're really excited to have a full staff now. So it's been a while. So our full-time or our half-time code enforcement position is filled, plus now our permit technician is filled and out front, our clerks are filled. So it's been a while since we've actually had the reliable staff who's trained and going to be around. So we're excited about that.
Now we just got to get the planning commission back up, a full roster. Yes, welcome.
Yes.
Thank you, Alyssa. Glad to have you.
And so part of the reason why we haven't had a couple meetings recently, I apologize for having to cancel them on you. We've been working on looking at the signage, working at the other issue, which is our retooling our code. David has got a huge chunk of the retooling our code done. I started working on the sign stuff, but we've been getting pulled away between public records requests and the city's taken some pretty drastic action lately. So if you're not familiar with this, since we last met, the city had an interlocal agreement from 1981 and 2002. It was a woodland planning, urban growth planning agreement with Cowlitz County, and the council and worked with me, and we had some discussions about the effectiveness of that ordinance or that interlocal agreement, because in 2018, when we were looking at our comprehensive plan amendments, they came in and said under that interlocal agreement, the city is obligated to recognize the county's wishes, because under this interlocal agreement, we had to comply with the county, whereas the county only has to consult with the city. So when projects come to us, we send comments, and they may or may not take those comments into account when they make their decisions, whereas the city is obligated to take the county's stuff into their decision-making process. And in 2018, after the county raised those issues, we stopped discussing the expansion of the urban growth boundary. And what was brought to our attention earlier this year was the interlocal agreements were both rooted in our comprehensive plans that were in effect at the time. But in 2016, when we wrote our new comprehensive plan, the portions of those comprehensive plans that said we are planning under these interlocal agreements, the consultant did not include that language. So in fact, the comprehensive plans are compliant with the Growth Management Act, not with these 20-year-old 30, 20, and 30-year-old interlocal planning agreements, and that the comprehensive plan is now our guiding planning document, not the interlocal agreement that it used to be. So the council basically elected to clarify that those resolutions were out of date, and so they rescinded those resolutions because they were no longer in effect. And then at the next meeting, we had a discussion about, well, what should we do with the 2018 applications that we processed them, we took them through the environmental process. We had almost a dozen public hearings and public meetings and workshops, open houses, and in the end, we just left them in limbo because we didn't issue a decision on them. We just essentially stuck them in a drawer, and they never got the answer that they paid for. And so the city council, or the mayor, directed me to bring that back before the city council, and they adopted a revised or an updated ordinance, which basically said, in retrospect, we should have finished that conversation, and because the environmental review was done, we implemented our public participation plan, and we complied with the Growth Management Act, which was accepted by Commerce in 2019, that the process was adequate. When we adopted our comp plan revisions in 2019, they felt that it made sense for us to expand the urban growth boundary, and they approved all of the requests to be included in the urban growth boundary, but they said, in fact, we want to plan for the entire woodland bottoms, because they were hoping over the last 5 years that the county would take the hint and engage us in a planning effort for the woodland bottoms, and there hasn't been any movement in the last 5 years. And in fact, they've made comp plan decisions that were inconsistent with our current urban growth boundary and comp plan and our comments. So what they did is they adopted the new ordinance and basically ordered me to prepare an application for the change of the Cowlitz County Comprehensive Plan to expand the urban growth boundary. And before I could prepare that application and submit it, the county submitted an appeal on the SEPA based upon the fact that we had inadequately discussed the environmental impacts of planning for the bottoms and expanding the urban growth boundary. And then we since found out today that they filed a suit in Superior Court arguing that our ordinance was in violation of certain laws. And unfortunately, I haven't read that order, so I'm not sure exactly what their claims are. But now our efforts to plan for the bottoms were in both a SEPA appeal and it looks like Superior Court. So we'll be discussing how we're going to approach that going forward. But that's new as of today. So there's been a lot of other issues that are kind of keeping us sidetracked and not allowing us to work on the signs and some other issues that are coming up. So it's exciting times. But one of the things that actually there's two big things that we've been talking with various external agencies about. One of them is a cost of planning analysis for the Department of Commerce. They are looking at trying to gather information on how much these unfunded mandates to do planning efforts, how much it costs. And they've asked the City of Woodland, and I'm participating with them, doing an analysis of basically to update the comprehensive plan. How much time and effort does it take to update an ordinance? How much time and effort does it take? Because they've never had that data of actually what those unfunded mandates cost. So I'm working with them on that. The other effort that we're working on with the Department of Commerce is this that I'm going to talk to you about today, and that is a pilot program for the climate resilience element of the comprehensive plan. So in the future, comprehensive plans are going to have to start a discussion about your community's resiliency for natural disasters, and in this case driven by potential climate change and impacts. So we are not actually going through the effort of updating our comprehensive plan and generating an element, but the Department of Commerce is working with the University of Washington and some consulting firms to develop a toolkit so that as that effort starts to become required and cities and counties, jurisdictions are updating their comprehensive plan, there's a tool for big and small jurisdictions that they'd be able to have some kind of roadmap to figure out how that works. And so they approached us because they know we're wrestling with the issue of the fully planning and partially planning GMA jurisdiction issue, the fact that a large portion of our community is in the floodplain, the fact that a large portion is behind a dike, the fact that we are covered by interlocal agreements for fire protection and those kind of issues. Those are all relevant for emergency services, and if there's some kind of natural disaster, the community's resiliency. So they picked us as one of their communities to help run them through the pilot and to test the toolkit. So we're not actually going to go through the effort of producing an element, but we volunteered to engage in this because there's going to be a bunch of state help and support and consulting work, and if we get some really good information out of it, we can have that in our pocket for when we do our comp plan update, so that we can have a little more education and understanding of how to think about problems, not just from the how do you handle transportation, but when you fix your transportation problems, you reduce carbon emissions, you reduce traffic, you reduce miles traveled, and there's other ways to think about solving our transportation problem other than just saving people time on their drive, because that does have environmental impacts that are positive by considering those things. So I want to be clear up front that we are not necessarily going to dive into a lot of deep discussion and community engagement. At this point, we are going to invite that engagement, but it's not necessarily so we can end up with a comp plan element that we're immediately going to do a comp plan amendment and add it to our so
you're not bound to the findings in any
yes, we're not bound to, because at this point we're just testing the toolkit. We're taking it for a spin, and if
accepting the findings would be a bad idea. I'm not saying that.
Yes, Yeah, and it doesn't commit the community to implement anything that we discuss or any of the conclusions. It's just simply an effort. And they want our input, and they're eventually going to want your input as, a community representative. Did it make sense? Was it half-baked or fully baked? Excuse the pun.
Sounds kind of like free money, so to speak, right? I mean,
Yeah. Free consultant work and relationship building with the state.
it's too good to be true. It's a trap.
Yeah.
But it
Well,
may well be.
and given our relationship and how we're going to have to rely on the Department of Commerce to work with us for this comp plan discussion about planning for the bottoms, whether it's GMA compliant or legal or not, it'll be nice to have some good relationships to discuss about why it's important to talk big picture while we're being sued for approaching a big picture approach when we don't have a legal basis for thinking big picture. So
Did you say the one of the interlocal agreements was from 1981?
yes, yeah. So it was
That's way before GMA. Wouldn't GMA have voided that or something?
well,
I'm not an attorney. It
yeah,
probably is an
and that's
irrelevant
part of our
question. I don't
approach
know.
because back in 1981, they
all changed,
probably
though.
had the only planner in the county, right? And so of course we're going to use them to help us, look at development impacts for the city. And then it was updated in 2002, and GMA was in place, but our comp plan really hadn't matured. That was the 2005 comp plan that it got incorporated into. And then, of course, we go from 2005 to 2016 without even looking at our comp plan again. And at that point, it was a total rewrite, and it was compliant with GMA. And the current council is like, okay, why are we implementing a 1981 agreement
Right.
when they're, half the county's unzoned, and we're trying to implement GMA? It doesn't make sense to give them the keys to our car.
If you're reading it on carbon copy paper, it's probably too old to be using at this
Yeah.
point.
Okay, so if you can go to the next slide, David. So this is kind of what this toolkit evaluation is starting to the pilot setup. We're going to talk about development and the planning process for the pilot. We're exploring the climate impact tool that has been developed by the University of Washington, and unfortunately we're a little ahead of them, and they're beta testing their website. So we can't talk about that tonight, but we will get that and help you look at what they're looking at. So I have some examples, and there's some sheets next to you that were put up there today. They are actually similar information that's being generated by the Cowlitz tribe system, and they have their own up and running model for climate impacts that in the area of their tribal historical land. So they are just a little ahead and have some model. So for lack of other information, we kind of threw that in there just so you can see kind of the models, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. The next step that we're engaging in now is we're looking at our comprehensive or various plans to figure out, okay, is there any resiliency discussions in there that we need to focus on and figure out, are we prepared? So we're going to evaluate the plans and policies that we have. Then we're going to do an assess vulnerability and risk study, kind of look at our infrastructure, the dikes, the bridges, the on-ramps, if there's a flood, is our emergency plan up to date? And then we're going to figure out what to do after that. Eventually, the idea is you would develop pathway for developing policies to update the comp plan. But for us, we're going to kind of go through those motions without having to be obligated to update the element itself. So, next slide, David. This is just a different way for that to be viewed. So we're starting with process, collect, explore the climate impacts, audit our plans and policies. Some communities are just going to go right to our existing plans and policies are good enough. Some communities are going to go, okay, our policies are good, we just need to update some mitigation measures. Whereas others are going to go on to full-on have to do assessment of vulnerability and risk because they haven't done any of that work at all. And then you're either going to have to do new goals or hazard mitigation plan. So, for example, our shoreline program, when we adopted it, the last big update with Cowlitz County, they included a shoreline management master program plus a hazard mitigation plan with it. So in that case, our shoreline should meet this, but the comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily have any mitigation plans. You rely on other stuff. So this is just a different way of looking at that previous slide. Next one, David. Thank you. So the climate impacts tools, the demo, and the discussion of the climate impacts was what our last meeting, or our next meeting, is going to be about next. So when we talk about climate elements, we're going to be looking at essentially these portions of the community that we're going to be looking at. That's how resilient our agriculture industries are going to be, buildings and energy, cultural resources and practices, economic development, emergency management, human health, ecosystems, transportation, waste management, water resources, and zoning and development. So those are kind of the categories that we're going to be looking at to evaluate resiliency. Next one. So what are we going to be looking at? Well, increased heat, in other words, warmer summers, longer, more intense heat waves, heavy rains, flooding, landslides. This is probably where we're going to get most of our mileage. The question of more frequent and intense precipitation and storms that cause flooding, changes in timing of hydraulic conditions in rivers, summer drought and wildfire. So we already know that we're affected right now with air quality because of the fires that are in close proximity. Where I live in Vancouver, we were actually right on the border of Zone 1 for Larch Mountain, and it seems philosophical that, yeah, you understand wildfires can happen, but I'm in the middle of Vancouver, and all of a sudden I'm having to think about, okay, what am I going to throw in the car? Where's my passport? Where's my birth certificates? My kids' birth certificates. It's like, I never would have thought that in a million years, and all of a sudden it's, wildfires happen in Oregon and in the Gorge. They don't happen in Camas. So those are kind of the issues that we're going to look at for the things we talked about previously. Next slide. So this is an example of the tribal model that we're using, and it talks about, okay, the average historic temperatures and from 2020 to 2069, the model shows about a 4.4 increase, but after that it'll go to a 6.9% increase, and historic, it was 48 degrees is the historic average. And so they kind of work this out using their various different models, and I think there's 6 categories. There's like our current is considered the low, or our current planning trajectory I think is low, medium, and there's low, medium, low, medium, low, high, low, high, medium, and high projections, which basically is kind of shades of, okay, these are the 6 scenarios of if nothing happens, if things get better, if nothing happens, and then there's 4 models for if things get bad, really bad, really bad, and terrible bad up above. So next slide. This is one of their models for how many days over 105 degrees city of Woodland gets, and historically there's 0 days of over 100 degrees in Woodland, and within, I think, the next 40 years, they expect to have 5 days a year over 100 degrees. It doesn't sound like a lot, but I guess it's one of those things in the model that is scientifically significant. So, next slide. So this talks about precipitation changes. So 1.7 inches per year higher over the next 40 or through by 2069. We currently get 80 inches, so 1.7 doesn't sound like much, but then the next 30 years I think is another 3.4 inches, so it's growing logarithmically. And then the idea of when is it raining? Well, from October to March, it's actually going to go up 3 inches a winter, but in the summer it's going to go down by 1 inch. So the summers are going to be longer and hotter and drier, whereas the winters are going to be wetter and wetter. So we're getting into this discussion of, okay, if this happens, the summers you're going to have massive fire dangers, and is the city's water system adequately sized to be able to make it through those dry months? And what happens if the river goes down because of precipitation declines? And then in the winter it's wetter and wetter, so now we're dealing with flooding and landslides, which is a totally different problem than we deal with in the summer. So what's our priority? Are we going to prepare for potential flooding, or are we going to prepare for potential landslides and maintenance of our culverts and our stormwater systems? We have to prioritize so that if it happens, we have the dollars ready and allocated properly. Next question, or the next one. So this is just precipitation by winter, spring, summer, and fall. So you can see that we have drier summers, but historically, this is a decade. So that's 40s, 50s, 60s, or 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So that's what this chart represents. So you can see in the winter, precipitation is going higher. In the spring, it's actually going higher. In the summer, it's pogoing up and down. And the trend in the fall is that it's getting wetter as well. So for what this is worth, this is what the models are showing next. So precipitation changes again. This is the Cowlitz tribal model, and that's what that boundary represents. So on average, it looks like we're in about the 2-inch per year zone, or 2-inch in a year zone. Next one. This is the 4% storm, or the 25-year storm. So when you're dealing with stormwater, you generally look at the 100-year flood, which basically means there's a 1% chance in any given year that there's going to be a storm this big. And this is not the 100-year storm. This is the 4-year, so this is the 4-year storm. So essentially, there's a 25% chance that this storm will occur every year. And what this model shows is that 25% on the left, you see those hash marks, those are 20%. So within the next 20 years, that 25-year storm will actually be occurring it'll be a 43% storm, which means it's more likely to occur every 3 years instead of every 25 years. So, those are the numbers. Next one. So this slide represents the stream level, and they call it stream lengths, but it's the portion of the year when there's extreme low water, how much is left for fish and livestock and irrigation. And that's what those numbers represent, is you see that it's projected that these streams will get lower and lower in the summer, so there's going to be significantly less water left in the river or in streamways for irrigation and that kind of stuff. So this is where the agriculture gets in. If you're in eastern Washington, it's really important to know whether you can count on your irrigation all summer long, because you may plant dry land wheat instead of chickpeas or corn or something else that's more water intensive. So this may not make more sense for us. Where I envision this is important for us is our well is a rainy well, which means it's right next to the Lewis River, and it's got horizontal pipes that reach out underneath the river, and we take water out of the river essentially because we're taking it not directly from the river, but from under the river. It's river driven. And if there's less and less water in the river, if one of those arms actually is sucking water out of a dry portion of the bed, then it's going to start sucking in water. And can our system suck water and air, or is it going to stop sucking water and just suck all air, because that pipe, is our infrastructure capable of shutting off one of those pipes so that we get water through the other three? But if we're only working at 75% water pumping capacity because, this arm is under a dry portion of the river, those are resiliency questions that we need to be asking now. Next slide. And theoretically, what we're going to be doing is going through each one of our plans and taking a look at, okay, what are our buildings and energy concerns, and well, maybe let's take an example for emergency management. What are we potentially in danger of? Well, drought could mean we lose water in our water system. What would that mean for our economic development, well-being, and emergency management? So we're going to be trying to parse out that data and figure out how the tool helps us understand where our dangers and what our risks are going to be going forward. This is the evaluation process that we're going to use to look at to try and figure out, okay, what dangers are we in? The next step of this process eventually would be for you and the community and the elected officials to talk about, okay, what policies do we need to put in place for addressing this and making sure it doesn't happen? So in other words, maybe we build an extra 3 million gallon water tank so that we're full and stocked up before the dry weather comes, in which case everybody continue watering their lawn and drinking their food, or drinking their liquids and preparing their food. And that's how we're more resilient. But you can't build it once the drought is started. You got to plan years ahead of time and figure out how you're going to pay for it. Next slide. So again, the step we're at right now is looking at our plans. Next one. Thank you. So what we're looking at is we kind of lined up the plans that we think we need to go through. The comprehensive plan makes sense. County hazard mitigation emergency plan, water and sewer plan, the Cowlitz County comprehensive plan, our shoreline program. Port of Woodland, they're looking at developing an economic development plan for their land out on the river. So we may ask them to take a look at their own plan and join us in this conversation. Because if they're relying on us to supply water year-round, they need to know what we're thinking, and vice versa. So these are kind of the things that we're going to be looking at internally. Next one. Thank you. And the idea being is that we will go through each one of those plans and look at our transportation goals and policies and figure out which one of them makes sense for a resiliency point of view, or which one needs to be tweaked to say we want to build more housing and encourage our workers to work here, and that will create more capacity on our transportation system, because once we have a biking and a walking system in town, then we won't have to have everybody driving, which will help our transportation system, and it'll reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are created. It will reduce the amount of, that kind of stuff. Looking at our landscaping standards, so that's carbon sequestration. A lot of people see landscaping as a beautification issue, whereas environmentalists look at it, carbon sequestration, they don't care how it looks. So our standards are already there. We just need to figure out, okay, maybe we need to add more trees and less grass, so there's less chemicals put on the grass, and more trees for carbon sequestration. So there's ways that we can tweak what we have without turning ourselves into a wasteland of environmental development or economic development, because nobody wants to move here. Next one. And so part of this effort and this toolbox, hopefully looking for the co-benefits that I had kind of discussed just a minute ago. When you're doing one thing, there are other benefits that just happen to come out of the effort. And policy prioritization, again, that's getting back to the idea of, how are we going to spend our money going forward, and do you build something that meets your needs now versus your needs in the future versus your needs in the future if droughts start happening more, or there's more forest fires and that kind of stuff. So we're in a situation also that's kind of weird, and that is the river, Lewis River, where it has several dams and reservoirs north of us, and the question of whether our agreement is adequate to ensure that we have what we need going forward, because their goal is to manage the water to make the maximum amount of profit while they're ensuring that we have enough water for the city. And at what point, if there's a conflict there between the two needs, are we adequately covered, but we don't necessarily want them to go out of business because they can't produce power. But we need to do those evaluations and figure out what the priority are and make sure that we're coordinating with each other. So 1996 was a great example of lack of coordination between reservoir levels and releases and the weather and that kind of stuff. And they've made huge strides in their modeling, but do we necessarily want to rely on their model without knowing what the model's based on? And, you know, so there's questions on both sides of, is the existing model adequate versus is this climate change, are these models adequate? We're not going to get into that. We're mostly looking at how a small community can figure out, is it prepared for these kind of questions and discussions going forward? So, and I think that's the last slide. Oh, these are some of the co-benefits that are in the document that they're looking at. Equity and justice, cost savings, resiliency, improving salmon recovery, improving air quality, builds community knowledge. So all of these things have multiple answers to the policies and goals that we're looking at. So we'll be doing that identification as best we can given the time we have. And I think that might be, go ahead and skip this one. Yeah, skip, yeah. And that's back just the same
So
model.
this isn't, we're not paying for any of this.
We are not. Nope.
I'm surprised you put it towards us for any kind of recommendation.
Well,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Unless you're worried that climate
No.
change is politicized in some way and that there's going to get some weird pushback on it.
So, you know, I think the ultimate discussion about what we add to our comprehensive plan is going to be a much tougher conversation. And part of the reason why I think we volunteered to be having this discussion now is to build the relationship, to take a look at the tools. And I'm a big advocate for having these conversations and letting them stew. In 2018-19, we talked about the urban growth area and the bottoms, and we've been stewing for the last 3 or 4 years about what the county's doing and how inadequately they're looking after our needs. And so it's taken 3 years, but the council has finally said, okay, we're tired of waiting, you got to do it. This is kind of the same thing. We still having the conversation. We're not going to debate whether the models are accurate or not. The question is, if the river level falls for whatever reason, is our water system going to be able to pump water? If the answer to that is no, I don't want to argue about the model or whether you believe in climate change. I want to argue about whether or not we should prepare our water system and our sewer system and our, you know, emergency evacuation routes. That's what I'm going to focus on, because my job is not to debate the science.
So we won't go through the whole process to put it on, but I mean, we'll basically be most of the way there. When we're
Yeah.
ready to do that?
Yeah. So theoretically, we're going to raise a lot of questions, and we might get to explore them, or I might be told, okay, yeah, we've had enough work sessions, just finish the work and send it on, and we don't get into that conversation.
Well, this is really exciting to me. I think it's these sorts of things have been on my mind a lot lately, just because of my profession. I do some of this for a living. And I think it's a great, I'm really glad you jumped on it.
And I
It's going to be
think
very important, especially as we're talking about being more responsible for the bottoms.
And I think part of the reason why it's important that we have this conversation is, you know, somebody out there in the community might get interested, and once the model is up and running, 2 o'clock in the morning, you can't sleep, you're in your pajamas, get around and poke around and figure out what you think, so that when you show up at the meeting, you've actually said, I ran this model, and I spent 3 hours on it, and this is what my conclusions are. They're all wrong. Great, they need to know that too, because before we release this and this toolbox for everybody to take a look at, you know, University of Washington, they're probably a bunch of smart kids, but they're still kids and they haven't graduated. They had, you know, may have 2 years experience, they may have 20 years experience. You know, if there's a problem with the model, they may not spot it. And they're developing it right out of the box, and, you know, what software do you have that hasn't been updated a million times since you bought your phone, right?
So there have been some pretty big changes in this just the last year or so. This is going to be the 5th or 6th iteration of this big old data set they've got. So it's definitely getting better and more useful. They're downscaling this time. It's getting better.
Okay, so that's it. That's probably the meat and potatoes of what I had on this item. We do the next item on the agenda. I haven't really had a chance to work on it, so I don't know that there's all that much.
You want me to skim over that, huh?
Yeah.
Before we move on, any more thoughts about this pilot program? Cool. I think it's great. All right. Next up is Woodland Side Code Update. I think we can maybe just wait till that's further along, or do you want to focus? Let's go on to something that's been a long time coming. Also excited about this. Retooling our code batch 3.
Okay, so
David's got a presentation for us.
I do have a presentation for you, just to kind of outline my goals with this workshop. Right now, my focus on this was identifying some of the more substantive code changes within here, because there was, I believe, 53 different changes. The vast majority of all of our retooling our code work has been is spelling, grammar, other minor inconsistencies that do not have a major substantial purpose. The ones that I'm going to focus on today, and to be open, I do expect to have at least one more workshop next month in order to go through a lot more of those smaller ones, give you some time with the actual document. I know it's a lot, and so we can have some more discussions on that. The ones I've chosen to talk on today are a selection that are more substantive, and that there may be concerns and there may be a decision to pull them for further discussions on their own. I don't think there's going to be a lot of those. There's primarily one. The first one I'm going to talk about, I think my recommendation may be that we might want to take a deeper look at it after going into the code and making the changes. So just as an update for those who may not be fully aware, retooling our code is an attempt to make sure our code better reflects proper grammar, spelling, inconsistencies. It's an opportunity to look back at our existing code and identify small changes, typically spelling and quick fixes, small changes, and other items, minor and generally not particularly substantive, that can be fixed and modernized and to better reflect what we want our code to be, which is an understandable, straightforward document. And just as a note, these extend to a variety of topics. They are not all from our development standards. However, most of the ones that I'm going to be talking about today are more development related. So the very first code change that I did want to bring up, and again, this is because it is more substantive, was actually two parts. The first is under the Woodland Municipal Code 1056-020, which is boats, recreational vehicles, and trailers. This is something that has come up regarding temporary storage and moving boxes. And the reason I say it's in two parts, because it was brought up both for within the public right-of-way as well as on private property. So looking into it, my goal when putting this together was to find something that would allow people to utilize a variety of services that are out there. You know, pods I know is a big one. There's a variety of the self-moving services. And if you did not know, essentially how it works is that a company, and this trash hauling as well as some short-term storage solution companies that fall into this as well. These are moving storage companies that will bring you a pod, a small container, essentially a shipping container that they either put in the parking space in front of your home or in your driveway, generally for, depending on the type, between 3 and 5 or 6 days. You pack it up, they will move it to they're moving either to wherever you're going or to a long-term storage location. So in general, the big questions, one of the reasons I wanted to bring this one up is because it is adding to the code. It's adding something specific to the code. It's substantive. While I can put down what I think is the best kind of solution, that may not be what you feel like, and you may feel like you want to have a deeper discussion about this, because there are, after going through it, there are several questions that have come up, and some of which have been answered, some of which have not, and there's a couple different directions we can go. As I said, the first part would be within the public right-of-way. I've talked to Public Works Director briefly about this. She's not completely opposed. However, again, this is kind of where those questions come up. What I have suggested is for within the public right-of-way, a 7-day maximum time it can stay there. This would allow for most of these services to function. They generally are between 3 and 7 days that they would be out front. You would have to pack it and then they'd take it away. Either way, there would be limits on the sizes of these containers. Both, they would have to be, they could not exceed 700 cubic feet of space and 150 square feet in area. This would allow most up to the medium size pods or storage boxes that these companies come out with to be permitted. In some cases, it would not allow for their largest size, which can, if you see them, can be quite huge and obstruct the streets, especially on the smaller streets. No matter whether it's on, and then on private property, so in someone's driveway, for instance, I had a 30-day maximum time period it could stay there. So again, if it's on your private property, a little bit more leeway, you know, because it is your property. Either way, there are some conditions that they would have to follow per this code. They would have to be used solely for storage, transportation of, or disposal of items, material, and or possessions of the owner of the property to which the storage container is placed. My thinking there is we don't want people moving these storage containers around and kind of, oh, it's my neighbor's box, I'm holding it because he had it for 3 days, you know. We don't want it to become, oh, you know, I'm holding this for a buddy, etc. They shall not be utilized for human and or animal habitation. I did miss a not in there, but we don't want people living in them. No human, no animal habitation. It's not a dog pen. It cannot extend more than 12 feet from the curb at any point. If it's going to be one of the options in the right-of-way, again, to prevent it stopping, to prevent it from interfering with normal traffic. That's pretty standard for these devices and these temporary storage containers. And all of these, no matter which option on the driveway in the street, they would have to be marked with the delivery date, so the date it's delivered, it's started, as well as the removal date of said container. So essentially, we want to have a way of going by and saying, okay, this is this was delivered yesterday, and it's planned to be picked up tomorrow. Okay, it's 3 days, that's fine. Another question that came up was about the zoning. My initial thought was it should be just allowed within the residential zones of the city. We don't want to get into arguments with commercial and industrial users that temporary storage is fine if they move it on and off the property. Again, we want this to be somewhat targeted to allow for this use and to allow residents to have a clear direction as to, yes, this is allowed, this is how you do it. We don't want it to turn into, okay, I'm going to store something wherever. However, again, that's where I'm kind of thinking, is this a more in-depth discussion than retooling the code really is about? Because retooling the code is about making fixes. It's not really about making changes to the code beyond what exists, or policy changes. The second topic I did want to bring up, just because a substantial amount of this retooling the code has to do with subdivision and short subdivision ordinances. Just none of this is particularly substantive. However, it's a lot of changes to the subdivision code in Title 16. You will find them on the 3rd page. Just to go through some of the most extensive ones. One thing that has come up with discussion between other professionals looking at other codes as well as with developers is that Mylar and India ink are two specific materials that are called out in a code repeatedly within specifically Title 16, requiring them for the final platting process. Mylar, if you did not know, is a plastic sheet film type of material in which traditionally, back in the day when we did not have long-term electronic copies and other preservation methods, final plats would be platted onto Mylar sheets because it degraded slower than paper and other traditional materials. Similarly, Indian ink, I've seen it called Borth, is a specific type of black ink that traditionally would be used in the platting of subdivisions as well as other types of engineering and traditional plans. Both of these are more traditional materials. There are still some codes besides ours that do require them for the final platting process, either to make it seem more professional, to make it seem more streamlined. However, it has been brought to our attention that they are no longer necessary to actually file a plat or any other document, and it might be a nice modernization to not strictly require Mylar in the platting process, and same with India ink. To be honest, I'm not sure if we've ever made sure and gone through the scientific process of making sure it is specifically India Inc., that the final plat is drawn in. I'm not sure exactly
You
what
don't
that
use
process
name.
would be.
What are they paying you for?
So for that seems pretty simple to me. However, as I said, codes currently vary pretty significantly. I've been told by mostly developers, just to be transparent, that the requirement to get subdivision plats on Mylar can be what they see as an excessive cost or an additional cost, and it just doesn't make sense when we've got a wide variety of ways to maintain these files and records for long periods of time. The other major change to the subdivision or Title 16 section is going to be about short subdivisions. The short subdivision code section has not been updated since 1975. It still assumes well water and private septic systems as the primary source of water and sewer services. The proposed amendment acknowledges that public systems are the primary source of water and sewer, and in most cases are going to be required to be connected to when making a short subdivision application. It's still, in my proposed changes, it still does note that if connection to a private system, be it a well or a septic system, is permitted under our code, they would have to get the proper approvals from ecology and the Department of Health and other agencies as well. So I did keep that in just to make sure we don't, miss it. However, just mentioning that our public water system is permitted and properly reviewed, same with a public sewer system, and that those are the primary systems, will help make it easier to write these reports. It'll help make it clear to applicants, especially out-of-town applicants who might not be as aware, that we aren't expecting you to drill a well or put in sewer, and it just modernizes the code to the current state of the city today. And the third, and I believe final kind of major, more substantive topic I want to bring up is kiosks and vendors. Kiosks and vendors are treated within our code in a couple of odd manners. The definitions are not very clear, and not very clear about the difference between them, with some being administrative temporary uses in some zoning districts, others being administrative conditional uses, and honestly, it would be hard for me as an applicant to understand what's the difference and how to even go about getting, say, a food truck or a small kiosk or vending stand in. So I did modify the definitions to make some more specific outlined, some more specific definitions and make it clear what the intent is. My intention going into this, again, was not to add any new definitions, just to change the existing ones so we can work within the current code. So specifically, I added that tents, tent sale locations, trailers, or trucks are kiosks, and are designed to be temporary or mobile uses. So this could include food trucks, tent sales on private property, etc. Again, temporary, I wanted to focus on kiosks are temporary. They're temporary uses. They're something you set up in a place for a week, a month, etc., and can be permitted as such. And then vending stands, which is the term used within our code as being permanent long-term uses. So this would be like an espresso stand or a photo mat or similar, typically drive-through or walk-up, small vending huts, vending structures. And the final kind of topic I did want to touch on was bicycle parking. We already, within our highway commercial zoning district, require new developments to identify and have bicycle parking. However, it's not ever really been very clear in terms of how much or where. It's a lot of subjective issues. If you have a Safeway and it requires bicycle parking, can you just put one small vac out front? Per existing code, arguably you could. So my intention going into this was to just clarify that and make some proposals as to what we could look at, and essentially clarifying that bicycle parking must be within 100 feet of an entrance. I believe the existing code said it had to be close to or near an entrance, which again is very subjective. And then setting a specific requirement of 2 spaces per 5,000 square feet of building footprint, which again is meant to prevent large buildings with only one bike rack, etc. Essentially, you have to have a specific number. And again, because we're talking about bike racks, I put in there that a single bicycle parking space or parking rack is defined as any rack or designed to store one bicycle. And that would specifically in the code section include, one rack as a part of a larger multi-bike rack structure. Again, the idea is not to make it hard. It's okay, you can put a bike rack with 4 slots there and that meets it. That's fine. Just to make sure that if we're requiring bicycle parking, we should require some basic standards to it. And I've done some research to come up with the numbers. I'm definitely open to suggestions or requests, because to me this is more about let's clarify, let's make sure that the guidelines are outlined properly. So with that being said, are there any questions so far?
Yeah, I've got a question. Well, I don't know if it's a question or maybe should be saved for the discussion part, but related to the storage containers, I'm not down within the right-of-way for any reason. I think it should be private property.
Yep.
I don't see a situation where putting it in the right-of-way would be good. I don't. You can't see around them if you're pulling out of a driveway. It's the road, right? If somebody crashes into it, would we be liable for allowing them to put it there? I mean, I think there's issues with putting anything in the right-of-way.
Are we liable for crashing into parked cars?
Nope. But a parked car is not the same as a much heavier, giant steel structure either that doesn't crumple.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not an attorney and I'm not hunting for it, but my opinion is that I'm not down with putting them in the right-of-way.
Yep. And again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring that one up front and center, because there is a lot more questions that came up when I started working on it. than perhaps it looked like at the surface
I'm
when
just
these
one
were
vote,
identified.
This is the way this works. I'm just one vote. If
Oh,
other people
100%.
think it has applications in the
Yeah.
right of way, then so
Yep.
be it. Also, I wanted to know, you had stated that you can apply for 30 days, right? I think there should be some limitation on reapplication, so they can't just reapply and reapply and reapply, so that storage container's been there for 2 years and they just keep buying a permit for it every 30 days. I don't think that would be okay. I think there's a need for them sometimes. Also, I don't see the problem if you do limit to just 30 days within, say, a year's time or whatnot, then I don't think it would be bad to have it available to commercial properties either, for their yearly sale of extra inventory or whatnot. But if you want to allow them to reapply, then maybe you don't want your commercial areas with storage units all over them all year, right? The subdivision, short subdivisions, yeah, I don't think that's really an issue. Mylar, if it isn't needed, why make people pay for it? And that's kind of the no-duh category, right? And I'm fine with your recognition that you wanted to mention the public water and sewer in the short subdivision code that wasn't upgraded, but that's already a requirement, right? They have to connect to public water and sewer?
They
Or
do.
Can they be a certain distance away and not connect, kind of like?
They can be, I believe, for sewer, they can be a certain distance away.
Sure. Okay.
And there may
Same
be
as far.
some very specific implementations in which they can be not required for water. Water is much harder to actually not to get a well. Again, that's not really all that substantive. They're already there. Just putting it in there, if existing
As long as you're
code
doing
makes
it
it sound like every short subdivision needs to figure out their well situation and their private sewage disposal situation. So just putting it in there seems to be a quality of life thing more than anything.
This last question's probably gonna seem like a dumb question to tell. I've never seen a bike rack for one bicycle. Like, wherever there's a metal bar, they like put as many bikes in there as they can, right? I mean, isn't every rack potentially 4 bikes or something? I mean,
You don't get out of Woodland much, do you?
There are very rare cases of single bike racks. Most are going to be at least 2, one on
seems
each
like if
side.
you
It's more
put one
about
in front of one,
designed.
like the
It's more about design, and specifying that we aren't asking for like a full, like one of those big metal full racks for like 5, and that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about bike space. It's for single ones. We're not going overboard. We aren't looking to replace all of our big parking lots with big, huge bike rack towns.
We're not doing that yet. That's next. Sorry, Travis.
There are a couple. No, go ahead and finish your conversation. There are a couple things I'll throw in at the end as well.
Okay.
No more questions.
Is the right side of the table here? Any?
For the short subdivision, is there a limit on how many homes? How many square feet?
So I do have an update on that.
Okay.
So we did some grant work previously in the last couple of years, and we did reintroduce that to the city council. They had the first reading, and a short plat is now defined as 9 lots or less, and SEPA exemption is 9 lots or less. And so a lot of the housing issues that we had talked about a while ago is now before the council, and they will be adopting that by all indications. That includes duplexes on corner lots where you have one driveway off of each frontage, the accessory dwelling, streamlining the accessory dwelling unit codes that we had talked about, The only thing that seems to have hit a hookup or a hiccup on that is there was some consternation about requiring international building code for accessory dwelling units. And so I think that's just a nomenclature thing, because it used to be the uniform building code and uniform electrical code and uniform fire code. Now it's the international fire code, because more countries than just the U.S. use it. And so there was some question as to what the implications of that was. But all of the recommendations from the City Council had been brought forward and are being implemented by the Council. Hopefully at the next meeting that'll be effective.
Okay. Great. Sharon, you have any thoughts?
Nope.
Okay. On the bike racks, I do have a couple thoughts. Is that, it's only in C2 that we require that?
Yes, only in C2.
Can we add that to C1? I guess that's not a retooling or a code thing, but I think it makes a lot of sense in C1 as well. Maybe put that on the list somewhere, I guess.
So I think we can have that discussion. City Hall has a bike rack because it's got a recessed entry, but there are other businesses along the frontage where you might not be able to do it without putting it in the right of way.
So that brings me back to Brian's question about single bike racks, and which is another thing I was thinking about. I like this seems good. I think I have encountered a lot of bike racks in my life that are garbage, like hard to use, will actually damage a bike, and are just like not worth the pot metal they're stamped out of. So I think maybe having some actual design standards, it might seem kind of like a little too nanny-ish, I guess, maybe nitpicky, but it really, if we don't, we're going to get bike racks that aren't even functional. They're just in the way. And thinking about, downtown, some of the, actually best and easiest to use bike racks are they're either just a post with like a little circle in it that's really easy to lock to, or a staple, which is just, it's like a giant staple on the ground, and those, they're great for one or two bikes, and you can orient them parallel to the street so that they're not actually taking up much sidewalk space. And I think businesses would probably, if they're forced to put in bike racks, they'd probably like something like that too, because it's not going to, take up their real estate much. But they are very useful, and they're really easy to use. And you can, it's not like you're going to wedge your front wheel in it and bend it like some of the cheaper designs. And I don't think they're, it's a hefty chunk of metal, but it's not a complicated design, so I don't think they're terribly expensive.
How wide are your sidewalks there downtown? They're pretty wide, aren't they?
I'm not sure.
We couldn't get in trouble with ADA stuff by putting a bike rack in there, would we? That's the only thing I would worry about.
Yeah. And I think the width of the sidewalk also varies downtown a bit, just as our standards went up and occasionally down and all of that.
And I think it's reasonable, where the sidewalk's too small, I think it's reasonable to not force people to shoehorn something in there
Yep.
with their space. Yeah, those work well when you don't have much space. Out in the C2, the space is probably less of an issue. It's just kind of a lot more to go around.
Yes.
But still, a design that's actually functional seems important. And let's see. Real small thing in 1610-050 talks about review by the planning commission. You didn't bring this one up. It's one I noticed where it says being signed by the chairman. that just feels awkward to me. It makes me think of Chinese communism. So maybe we could make that. Maybe we could just make that chair. And then India Ink and Mylar. I think it's totally, you're right on. I kind of just sentimentally want to like leave that in as an option.
I mean, we're not going to not allow anyone to.
Okay, I just
We're not
it's sort of-
prohibiting it.
This is a living document. It's sort of our
Yeah.
history is contained in this code.
Personally, I like Mylar as well.
Okay.
These kind of sentimental thoughts are why I struggle through cursive writing in school.
That's right.
Nobody-
That's right. And you've done it. And do you want it to be for nothing? No. So maybe we can just leave that in as an option. And then, yeah, the only other thought I had right now, other than this is great, you're doing great work, is also on the moving units, the boxes. Is just to think about like what the alternative might be, which is sometimes going to be somebody just parking a semi-trailer in the middle of the road while they unload it, which might be more obnoxious than having one set in a parking spot. Just a consideration for the future. I did notice there was one other thing, again, that you didn't talk about that was about drive-thrus in C1. And, do we want to allow kind of auto-oriented things downtown?
So I think what you're looking at, one of the things was looking at both C1 and C2 and the fact that no drive-thrus were technically on the permitted use, even though in both we did have quite a bit and we continue to have quite a bit. It's kind of a gray area. What had previously been discussed was drive-thrus for banks in C1, so like the U.S. Bank. They can have drive-thrus, and then C2 you can have restaurants and banks and a wider range. So that's what I went with. If you feel that there should not be drive-thrus in C1, you're more than welcome to give that recommendation.
Okay. So this has actually come up a couple times
Yeah, I think so.
in Sharon and I's tenure.
10. Wow.
And we've, I think kind of the consensus, we grandfathered in some existing auto-oriented businesses that were downtown, like the auto shop, but tended to agree that, the downtown district is the one place that we kind of want to set up to explicitly encourage being on foot or on bikes, or basically just not being in cars. So there have been a couple of exceptions. When the Red Leaf took over the bank building, it seemed reasonable to let them continue using that.
That is in C1? That's right on the edge of it? I was looking at the map wondering if that was...
Yeah, and I don't think we would have let them do that if it wasn't already there. but
You weren't
that was-
increasing the degree of nonconformity, so I think that makes sense.
Yeah, because it was already a bank, and I think that's fine. But I think just it's a small district, and just saying this is part of the city, we don't do drive-thrus.
Well, to be honest, C1, the drive-through for Red Leaf sometimes is,
It's less than functional.
it's very obnoxious.
Yeah.
It does cause traffic jams, and it's quite annoying, especially during
It's
rush
frustrating
hour.
when you're waiting for coffee and these people are trying to drive through.
You're trying to go to work or come home from work, and
Yeah, and that's I think that's and that's a separate issue, quite apart from the walkability part. Like downtown is just not set up to move a lot of cars through. So,
I agree.
and I don't think it should be. So
Completely agree.
that's my take on that. And any other thoughts about the great work again, David? Thank you. Any other thoughts going forward? I do sort of think, the storage and trailer one. it does seem like it's kind of borderline, maybe not quite retooling and more like setting new policy, so maybe we ought to have a hearing about that or something. We're gonna have a public hearing about this anyway, right?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Seems like maybe we ought to flag that, and maybe there's a couple more that, like, maybe we can do 2 or 3 of the, instead of just doing one at a time.
Couple medium ones.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not a big meaty one.
Exactly.
It is medium
Yeah.
enough that you might want to leave it in
Just,
there.
it's just bigger than retooling, but maybe less than a full meeting.
So I did want to bring up a couple things that had recently been brought up by David and I. Had a good discussion. Our code does not have any discussion about motorcycle parking. And are you interested in potentially having a quick discussion about our code currently says you can have compact parking, but only in industrial districts. And so do we think we should...
Odd to limit it only to that. But
So should it maybe be discussed for commercial as well and motorcycles? Because we run into sites where it's just frustratingly you're like 2 feet too short of providing enough width for parking spaces. Well, maybe 3 motorcycle spaces instead of 2 small car spaces or something. Maybe that's a discussion we should be having.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think, yeah, limiting compact spots, that seems weird. I think, I don't know, maybe motorcycle, sure, and maybe give some credit for more bike parking than is required. So you can use some of that space that isn't big enough for a full-size car parking lot, but we can also accomplish, or encourage some of our other comp plan goals.
are you in support of giving one motorcycle space the same credit that a full-size parking space would have?
Well,
Like if the minimum parking for that use and size was 8 spaces, would you be cool with having 6 spaces and 2 motorcycle spaces?
Well, and I think that's part of the discussion.
I
Maybe
wouldn't
it's
want
4.
that to be abused,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Maybe it's 6 parking spaces in return for 3 car spaces, like a 1.5 ratio or something.
Yeah, I think you'd need to.
That is.
It couldn't be 1-to-1.
I've done a little bit of research into this because it has been something we've talked about, just loosely. And yeah, it's normally, some combination of 2 motorcycle spaces equals 1 car space, or 3 motorcycle spaces equals 1 car space. And there's also generally some limit, so you don't get, someone doing a full parking lot of only motorcycle spaces and arguing that qualifies as all of their parking.
Yeah, obviously we don't want that. I wonder though about, some of our, we've got golf cart zone signs up all over town, but I haven't seen that we're exactly overrun with golf carts yet.
I've seen one of the ATVs already.
Did you?
It looks
seen
really,
many.
it looks really fun, to
I've
be
seen
honest.
many.
Makes me want one.
I wonder if, we can give people some kind of credit for a golf cart space or a bike space, or, again, maybe not like a 1-for-1 deal, but just trying to encourage, because we can write all day long in our comp plan that we want people to walk anywhere, but if we don't really make it worth business's while, we're never gonna actually get it done. So I don't know that that's like a slam dunk by any means, but something to think about.
And then there was one other thing that I wanted to throw in there, and that is we have had a situation where a citizen has come to the city council, and they are in an extremely strange situation in that they are in a funky corner lot, and they have, it's kind of more of a finger lot and surrounded by 3 sides by street. And the way the subdivision was developed is the gang mailbox is directly outside of their back door, their back window, and so they have no privacy because their fence is limited to 3 feet in height. And so the question was, can we design some code language that would allow around public infrastructure like gang mailboxes or bus stops or school bus stops, that there would be an exception to your front yard height limit of fences, so that at least around that mailbox, everybody who's checking their mailbox can't peer in their back window 24 hours a day, and there's no privacy with them having to live with their windows or their curtains drawn. And
Is this something you think that's gonna come up more than this particular spots? Maybe just give them a variance for this instead
No.
of.
It seems like an administrative.
So I think it's something that we should look at, because there are not a lot of those gang mailboxes around town, and they're not necessarily, this seems like the world's worst location for a mailbox, and the developer had horns when they were designing this, because it clearly is kind of like an evil
Well,
joke.
can we keep people from doing that again?
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like it needs a solution one way or the other. Whether it's just a one-off for that person or, I mean, if you think it could happen again,
Can the mailbox just be moved?
yeah, can we just
Well, yeah, I don't know what it would
angle
take.
grinder?
Is there anywhere else in the subdivision where there's enough room on the road for people to get out? And
Yeah.
I'm sure it's placed there because there's no better place to do it. So, and it's a giant gang box for the entire subdivision, and it's
That
weird.
does remind me that there was another one of these that was about setbacks, I think. Do we really have 30-foot front setbacks?
That has to be, that can't be residential.
That doesn't sound familiar to me, does that?
Is it? There's something, I saw something in there in setbacks.
There's
right?
there's a section, I believe, in industrial setbacks that had a
Okay,
Yeah.
fairly minor change. I don't think it was.
okay.
Which I probably would agree with for industrial, right?
Right, yeah,
They're usually
that's a
more
totally different
impactful
ballgame.
uses, so.
Yeah. I was just imagining. So what's that?
I
Hell of a
know
yard
what you're
before
talking
some
about, I
people
think
have.
I saw it in there too.
Anyway, if it's industrial, that's fine.
So are we supposed to make a recommendation for adopting, oh, we're just talking about it, okay.
It's a workshop. You can make a recommendation that, for instance, we take off the code change to, say, one of the ones we talked about. For instance, the storage container one. And
What do the planning commission members think about the placement within the right of way? Do you feel that that's a good idea, or am I just being too strict?
Well, it depends on where they live. I mean, if there's no other place than to put it in the right of way. I mean, if maybe there's some sort of cone signage or something put up to maybe alert drivers.
If it's a house, then they're gonna have a driveway 99% of the time, and that's where I think it should be. If you don't have a driveway, then you have a front yard.
So I've seen,
I don't want them in the right of way.
I've seen a couple times.
They're hard to look, you can't see around them and stuff,
Well,
There might be topographical problems,
yeah,
like the driveway is just too steep.
yeah, like my driveway, you could do it.
So the question is,
can you put language in that says, to the extent possible?
unless there's no other alternative or
Right.
something like that.
Because I'm a planner, I hate language like that, but here I am advocating for it. No, because whenever you leave any kind of gray area,
Oh, yeah.
Then
that's,
they go with the gray area.
boom, right here. That's what they do every time, and
Um,
without kind of strong code language
Would
to
it,
use,
So I've seen
it's
some,
really hard to
would it
fight
require
against.
a right of
some
way
places
permit?
will like issue a permit to like block a few parking spaces for moving in and out. And that seems to, I don't know, because it's like, you've had to notify somebody of it, you've basically had to promise that it's a
Um,
short-term thing.
Something to clarify is that you would need a right-of-way permit to place anything in the right-of-way, including the street. So it is something that we would look at and permit. So if there's
Okay.
something dangerous, it would not be approved.
Just any kind of sight distance
yeah,
triangle,
this is-
I mean, right?
Yeah.
Can we-
You know,
I
like they
would
would
like-
look at, okay, can you see out of your driveway when you're backing out, etc.
I would like to say leave them like 50 feet from an intersection, because I think that's
Part of the right-of-way permit would be to ensure that.
okay.
And the reason why that's an important point is that language for a planner, there's 50 ways to interpret it. With an engineer, it's black and white. They're either going to approve it or not. They don't care the circumstances. So guys like us, Brian, won't have to interpret that.
Good. Well, it's gonna be you, David, so it's up to you, man. Travis isn't gonna wanna argue about that. So David, what a great learning experience for you. I feel better about it knowing that the engineers are gonna look at it. I actually
You put
live
way
on
too
I
much
live
trust in engineers, man, I tell you what.
I have more trust in engineers than I do planners, and I'm a planner.
Yeah, I'm an engineer.
I live on a 3/4 of street because the other side of the street isn't developed yet. And if somebody put one of those there, it would suck. Right.
Use discretion. That's all. That's safe, right? Put that in code. Use your best. Use your best
What
judgment.
did you think about reapplying for another 30 days with those?
I mean,
I just think that could be
I
abused.
think you just make the permit twice as expensive each edition. And then it can be a
Have
revenue
you
center.
ever had to try to regulate a neighbor fight? Costs go out the door, man. Spite takes over the economic impact sometimes.
Alright. Just, it's always looking for revenue. It's important to run the city.
Just spreading my
so does-
discontent everywhere I go.
Does that currently happen that they renew it? The 30
Well,
days?
this doesn't exist yet, does it?
Doesn't really exist yet. So if someone called for a right-of-way permit like this, they would probably be told, no, you can't. It's not in the code.
I mean, I think those things are. I don't think they're cheap to hang on to.
No, if you were to
They
buy
are
one,
not,
they're probably going to want to hold on to it.
Yeah, I actually moved across the country with one of them. So,
You traveled via shipping container?
well, I traveled on a plane,
Okay.
but
Did you
You
have to
watched
bang
it
on the wall
delay?
to get let out?
All right. Okay. This is serious city business here, Brian.
My bad.
Okay. I feel good. Any last thoughts on that one?
Nope.
All right. 8:33. I think that wraps up our discussions and workshops then. Any more staff reports?
I think I kind of did my staff report
I think
during
so
that
too.
presentation.
All right. Fantastic.
Oh, so you know what? I know you haven't dove into the sign. I know you haven't dove into the sign code yet, but I just wanted to, because I thought about it a little bit, because I don't deal with signs much. I don't have that much experience with it, but just in general, I was trying to think of what my feelings were on signs. I don't want unlimited signs. I want what's minimally necessary for a business to be able to notify their customers, right? And I don't know where you fall in that scale of hooray sign or let's limit them. But if you wanted some side guards, I think a good balance is what's minimally necessary. I don't want to, make no signs because businesses still have a right to attract customers, right? And signs are important. But large, massive freestanding signs are no bueno.
What if we only allowed the noodle guys? I think that's the right answer.
So I don't know whether I need to comment on that. I was assuming that we were not going to spend a lot of time discussing changes to the current standards. So if the current standard is at X amount of square feet for the site, and it's usually one foot per lineal foot of frontage, and secondary frontage is a half foot, because we're not necessarily wanting to get into a discussion about, because I worry about that, because as soon as I say it's open, we'll end up with 5 feet per square foot, or lineal foot instead of a half. So I'll think smaller, and you'll want smaller, and we'll get much larger. So
It's mostly a settling the Supreme Court issue.
yeah. To me, I think more of the productive discussion for you guys to get in on is going to be the signage, the flags, the feathers, the banners, and whether or not those should continue unabated versus time limits versus numbers. Because right now that's the Wild West.
Yeah.
So this may be getting ahead of it, but when I was reading through the definition of a banner, I didn't see street banners there. You know, the ones that are up above.
Oh, like hung over over the street.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things we are gonna, that the reason why this is such a hefty conversation for me is because I need to go back and take a look, because currently that is considered a sign by a public employee in the conduct of their business. And the Public Works Director is in charge of that, and she's responsible for the Public Works team putting banners up there, whether it's the book sale or Planter's Day.
No. Advanced Electric puts them up.
What's that?
Advanced Electric puts them up. I mean, I guess they contract, the city contract.
Yes,
but,
they
yeah.
they do at the order of the Public Works Director, because that's our banner across the street there. But technically, that can no longer be done the way it's currently being done. So we're going to have to try and figure out how that works. Because by definition, if the Public Works Director is putting that sign up in the conduct of her business, that's totally irrelevant. We cannot regulate that at all. So we have to treat it as what kind of sign is it, and does the city have enough road frontage to install that sign?
City's
Number,
got a lot of road
size, and length it's displayed. Though
The
that's
city's got
all we
all
can
the road frontage.
regulate. Yeah.
I think Tracy
Yes,
can
and-
put any sign she wants up there.
And I have to figure out, how do you do directional speed signs and stuff like that, because technically the city can no longer place speed signs
Oh,
because that's all content. So somebody has to have solved that somewhere. I just haven't looked into it.
Yeah, we still have speed limits, so it must have been solved. Okay. All right. Well, Godspeed on that one. Sounds fun. Any last thoughts? All right. I don't need a motion to end this, do I? All right. Could I get a motion, pretty please?
I move that we adjourn the meeting. Adjourn the
Adjourn.
meeting.
Adjourn the meeting.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Lovely. Great work, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on board, Alyssa.